Tess, a big welcome to you. Thanks for joining us on the MedTech20 today. Really excited to have an interesting conversation and learn more about the business that you're leading.
Thanks, Gordon. It's nice to be here.
So maybe we could start with hearing a little bit about your business, what the mission of the business is, and just a little bit about the history.
So Fertility is a venture-funded startup, and we are working on democratizing access to better fertility care. So the whole idea for the company actually came from my co-founder, who's a clinical embryologist and has been working on Harley Street for about 10 years. And he noticed that the patients that were getting into a clinic to meet him had gone through whole journeys at home that really didn't have enough support there. And so he started sort of nosing around in the industry to see, well, what can I recommend to people before they step through the doors of the clinic? What can people try at home? And the more he was looking around, the more he noticed that actually there's very little at home that's available to people. And so he set out to create something that people could use at home. And that's a little bit the history of where we're at today. And the product that we've ended up building is based on intracervical insemination. So it used to be the de facto clinical treatment, and then for a number of reasons fell out of favor. And what we're doing really is we're bringing it back, and we're bringing ICI, intracervical insemination, back in a way that makes it affordable, accessible, and easy for people to do in their own home.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that, Tess. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about your own history, why you were kind of inspired to start this business.
That's a great question. So I met David, my co-founder, about 1.5 years ago, and I was working in a different area of femtech. I was at the time working in an area that was all about helping young women have better first sexual experiences. So whilst I was just trying to figure out what the right business model was and how to best help people, I met David, who was looking for a co-founder for Fertility. And the more we talked, the more we realized that our values really aligned. And he was working in a space that was becoming very dear to me. And I could really get behind what he was working on. I think, it's particularly around women's healthcare. More choices can only be a good thing. So it was a natural transition, and that's where we found ourselves today.
And how's life as an entrepreneur?
Not very balanced. That's a good question. It's exciting. I think the great thing is that I get to work on something that I love every day. And it's this sort of cliche that everyone says, do what you love, but it's kind of cool to be able to work on something like this. The flip side is that, being the CEO of a company can sometimes be a little bit lonely. I think everyone who's founded a company will tell you the exact same thing. I'm lucky to have a co-founder, and we're hiring a great team. So yeah, life is not overly balanced, but right. Hopefully as we build out the team, we'll get there.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about the journey of where your business is today, how you kind of arrived at the product, how you developed it, and the regulatory framework, et cetera. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that piece.
So my co-founder, David, had been working on designing a medical device probably for 1 or 2 years before I met him. And then together we started working to build a business around the design of the device that he had. So the device is inserted into the vagina. It is essentially a method of placing a cervical cap against the cervix to enable people to carry out intracervical insemination at home. So where we're at today, it's interesting. It's ostensibly such a simple procedure, but it's still a pretty regulated medical device, as it should be. It's being inserted into a body cavity. And so we are in the earliest stages of DFM. So design for manufacturing, which is taking the prototypes and the designs that we've got and turning those components into things that can be injection molded and can be manufactured. At the same time, we're going through a regulatory approval process. So we decided who knows why, to tackle EU and FDA certification and approval simultaneously, which my co-founder David's driving, and it is going well. We're currently going through the CE marking process, which involves a number of steps, including a conformity assessment, and then interestingly, the FDA has asked us to do a human factor study, a clinical-based study in the US to be able to gain 510K clearance. So we're currently planning and working our way through that.
And so you mentioned at the top that this kind of device has been on the market previously and kind of fell out of favor. So a couple of questions around that. I mean, what changes, or how have you kind of updated the device to make it more favorable, let's say, and also the regulatory piece? Are you able to piggyback at all off the device being previously in use in some capacity?
Yeah, we are. So there's sort of two answers to that question. The first is that ICI was a clinical treatment. So there's a whole raft of clinical evidence and scientific evidence to suggest the efficacy rates of ICI as a treatment methodology. Yeah. When it was no longer offered in clinic, a couple devices came onto the market offering this treatment for people to be able to do at home. There are a few predicates, so it's a 510K notification route as opposed to de novo, which we're quite lucky about. But one of the things about our design is, I can't say a huge amount about it other than it's got two main benefits. The first is that the cervical cap from a clinical perspective is sterile. But the other facet of that design from the user perspective is that as long as the semen provided by the donor or partner is consensually given, there really is no limits to how you can collect that semen sample and how you can use that device. So from an inclusivity perspective, not every family gets their start in the same way. And so people using known donor sperm, women who are trauma survivors who may not necessarily want to sort of have sexual intercourse as a part of their conception journey, and all sorts of families and people, access issues, disability, anything like that. The device is designed in a way that works for everybody. And that's really one of the main features of it that, I think I'm most proud of.
So interesting. You mentioned that you were looking to start clinical trials in the next few months. Can you tell us a little bit more about where you're at? Only obviously sharing what you're able to share.
Of course. So as a part of the regulatory approval process in the US, we're going to need to go through what's called a human factor study. It's essentially a usability study. And what it does is help us prove that the device is usable, and help us also make sure that no damage is incurred internally as a result of use of the device or the cervical cap. So that study is going to be carried out in a clinical setting, overseen by an REI or an OBGYN, and we'll be collecting the data from that study after it's run sometime in the middle of the summer.
Okay, interesting. And so are you actively looking for participants at this stage, or is it a bit too early to get people involved?
Great question. It's just a little too early. We will start looking for participants probably in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And I think, one of the ways that we're looking at recruiting those participants is putting out ads and notices in the area in which the clinic is located. And also often the clinic will have patient lists and waiting lists. And so we're just looking at the best way to recruit now, actually.
Right. Okay. Well, hopefully people can reach out to you through this podcast if they're interested in participating.
For sure. Absolutely. We'd be glad to have you.
So, we've talked some specifics about your business, a little bit about the history and the device itself. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you see as some of the biggest challenges kind of in the fertility sector today. Things like accessibility, affordability. I mean, what do you see as some of the key challenges in the sector?
It's a really interesting question. I think think quite deeply about the fertility sector. I mean, obviously it's my job too. And there are a few things that I see. Access and affordability really are the main issues that I see plaguing the fertility sector. I think if you look at the WHO data that was released in 2014, indicated that about 100 million couples, and note we're still talking about couples in an age when not every family has it start that way, but 2014 data said about 100 million couples are affected by infertility. And then if you look at the global statistics on the number of IVF cycles carried out in a year, and you just run the numbers, around about 3% of people who need treatment are actually able to access treatment. And wow. There are a couple of things at play there. On the clinical side, clinics often have quite a small footprint. They actually can't do more cycles, treatment cycles per year than their clinical footprint will allow. On the user side, there's access and affordability. So in the US, there's the average rounds out to about 2, maybe 3 fertility clinics per state. So not everyone is within driving distance of a clinic. And in addition to that, there's affordability issues. So the average spend in the US on clinical treatment is about $60,000, $61,000. Wow. So if you don't have health coverage, you really have no options ahead of you. And so I think from that perspective, I really do see access and affordability being 2 of the main issues that really we do need to tackle in this industry and in this sector.
Yeah, an alternative at home and obviously a lot less expensive. I mean, everybody seems to know somebody who is going through some of these kind of challenges, and the costs associated with it today are just astronomical.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And I think the thing about the cost that I find wild is you cross the border into Mexico and the price charts in a fertility clinic are a fifth, a tenth what they are in the US. And, similar in Europe, you just cross the border and suddenly the prices change. And I think in the fertility sector, medically assisted reproduction is really, it's this sort of moral and ethical and medical hotbed that sits at the intersection of genetics, science, medicine, morality, ethics, philosophy. I mean, you're creating lives. And because of that, it's one of the most inconsistently regulated and legislated medical sectors that exist today. And I think the inconsistencies that we see drive the different pricing and the different levels of access depending on where you happen to be located in the world. And in the UK, so I'm in London and there are quite a few fertility clinics here, but in the UK they call it a postcode lottery. So depending on where you live, you're either eligible for publicly funded fertility services or you're not. And I think really sort of cracking that wide open and taking a deeper look at not only the access issue itself, but why it's there in the first place, and sort of addressing the cause is something that I think we really should start looking into.
Wow, very interesting. So the patient experience or kind of concept of patient centricity has really come into focus in the last 5 years. And we've seen a lot of medical device companies kind of really turn their innovation drive towards that patient experience. On the other hand, I think, patients can sometimes be a little bit leery of maybe doing procedures at home themselves or using the devices. Which can be a scary thing, rather than having the supervision of a physician with you. So, I mean, how do we overcome some of these kind of obstacles, so we can really offer that patient a better experience and obviously make them feel assured that they're getting the same kind of level of medical oversight, let's say?
Yeah, I'll speak to part one of the question on patient centricity. I think this is a really interesting one for me, to see healthcare systems evolve to be putting patients at the center of their healthcare journey is a change that I find really heartening. I think the US leads from the front there, if anything, because there's a bit more of a cultural shift towards the patient as a customer instead of the patient as, well, a patient. I think that patients being in the middle of their journeys and feeling empowered to connect with physicians and have their questions answered and really understand the journey that they're going through is really important. Mm. At the same time, patient centricity in a healthcare system is very different to patients being the entirety of their own journey, i.e. the evolving trend in the at-home care market. I agree that it's an interesting point. I think it's a little bit like Apple. You know, you're going to have your early adopters who line up to get your stuff. And then you're going to have everyone else who sort of the herds that follow. And then you're going to have the people who, who get an iPhone last. I think with the at-home care market, we're seeing a couple of trends that I'm finding really interesting. The democratization of access to better healthcare. And I love that trend. It's what we are a part of at Fertility, and I think it's an incredible, thing to be driving. I also see a lot of products that are evolving that create an ecosystem around certain issues. So I'll speak to the fertility market. There's a lot of things that are evolving around the issue of conception. So fertility coaching, fertility insurance, fertility supplements, tea, ovulation predictor kits. There's a lot of products that pop up around the issue of actually conceiving, but there's very little that addresses the issue of conceiving at home. So I think when we talk about patients' hesitancy to adopt, I see people adopting quite easily the products that surround the issue, but hesitating to adopt the specific treatments that solve the issue. And I think that that's because culturally, treatment is really the purview of clinics and clinicians. And I think it's only natural that there's a bit of hesitancy and a bit of cynicism as well, on the part of people and the at-home care market. I think that's good. I think, I really hope that one day we will be sort of in a place where not only is the patient at the center of their healthcare journey when they're going through a healthcare system, but the healthcare system is able to sort of reach into certain technologies that exist in the home market and drive people to treatments that are, evidence-based and able to be carried out at home. So if anything, you start getting a whole raft of at-home treatments that are backed by clinicians and physicians, and hopefully that would help with that confidence piece.
I think you're right that the kind of the overarching trend is that democratization of the healthcare system and treatments. I like the Apple comparison as well. I think it's the first group of people who get the new iPhone are kind of the clinical trial almost, aren't they?
They are. And it's so interesting. In the at-home market, they really are. I had a conversation with one of the ex-design leads at Apple, and the detail into which they go, he worked on the Apple Watch, and the level of detail around, the sensors and I think when you get hardware that is in healthcare that's designed for the home market, you're able to pull in expertise and voices that maybe don't exist in the healthcare ecosystem. So you've got world-class product designers working on these things, and it creates these patient experiences that are incredible. I think, in fertility, I'm always struck by the diagnosis of unexplained infertility. And, I think for a millennial who can look at their watch and know if they're still alive or not, your watch is going to tell you how stressed you are and if you're breathing and how, do you need to stand up or not? And suddenly you go, you're trying to conceive and you can't. And you go to your physician and they say, well, there's no big issues. It's unexplained. Go home and try again. So for people who are used to having data as a service almost about their bodies, that the black box that is infertility is a particularly painful one. And it's an interesting problem to try and help solve.
Absolutely. Where do you see your business in 5 years' time? I mean, obviously you're hoping to kind of go through the approval process, get it into the market, have customer uptake, but do you see different things in terms of product development or going into other areas? Can you share anything about what you see as the future for the business?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a tremendous amount of potential to go deeper into the areas of reproductive health. And when I look at this company, I see us launching this ICI treatment kit towards the end of 2021 in the UK market, about sort of sometime around similar time the next year in the US market. I think that's really going to be our flagship product. It's the way that it's built out, the way that it's an entire treatment system makes it pretty unique and one of the first of its kind. So getting that established in the market and making that accessible and available to as many people as possible is really the short-term priority. But I think in the long term, my hope is that that kit is but one of a wider portfolio of hardware-based products that are all sort of hanging off one central digital health experience. Mm. And my hope is that the digital health experience that we build serves as a platform for people to self-serve in areas of medicine that are traditionally a little bit taboo, a little bit, just a little bit on the fringe, or areas of medicine where people don't necessarily feel comfortable stepping up or going to see a physician. So, reproductive health. And, within reproductive health, there's fertility, there's semen analysis, there's hormone testing, there's so many things. And so my hope in 5 years is that we have a portfolio of hardware-based products, the thesis behind which is that they are always accessible, always affordable, and always clinically validated. And that's really where I hope to see this go.
Wonderful. Well, great. This has been really good. Thanks so much for joining us on the MedTech20 today.
Thanks for having me, Gordon. It was great to be here.